Well, it's exciting to be talking about a very, very special man, Federico. I consider him to be a personal friend, even though we haven't talked some time. He's still going. He lives in California, still doing research, still one of the most brilliant people that has ever lived. And his contribution to computers is just off scale. I'm really grateful that in the early days of my career, I had a chance to get to work with him a little bit. But the circuits that he was designing initially were MOS circuits, meaning metal oxide semiconductors. And they made integrated circuits using this MOS technology. But for him to really be able to make a microprocessor, they needed something much better. And my understanding of the history is that he was actually the one that decided to go from a metal oxide semiconductor to using silicon. So Silicon Valley really, it's a good thing they brought him in from Italy, wasn't it?
It is a very good thing.
And I think he's now a U.S. citizen and been here a long time. But that was just one of his first contributions, and he led the team that made these first microprocessors. And the 8080 CPU that came out of Intel was the first microprocessor that I used for a Billings computer. When I heard you could get a whole computer on a little chip, I thought, that's going to change the world. I want to be part of that. And so I started figuring out how you could make everyone have a computer that could all share information. And that led to one of my most proud inventions. But the very first Billings computer was built with this Intel 8080 CPU. And I think I have a picture of this clunky, big old computer that I'd like to show you. We call it the Billings 404. That's the one right there. Now you notice the terminal looks a lot the same, but those two boxes on the bottom were so heavy you had to have two people to lift each box. So this is not what you call a pocket or a wristwatch computer. It was really heavy for two people to carry. And the data was stored on two floppy disk drives. These are drives, you open them, you pull out a floppy that was 8 inches square. And we call it a floppy because it was a piece of mylar or plastic coated with a magnetic coating, so you record data on it, and it was flimsy. You put it in there, close it. Well, I worked hard to get that computer ready to go. We got it in production. We could build 10 a month. We're really excited. And then I took it out to sell it. No one would buy it. Now, it was kind of pricey. It was $12,000, which in those days, $12,000 was more like $20,000 today. And finally, two of my friends bought one. So I sold two of them. And I thought, this isn't working. Well, so I sat down and had a really good private conversation with myself about this Billings 404 computer. The microprocessor was a great idea, but this computer wasn't a good deployment of that technology. So I started saying, what would I have to do to this computer to make it be something that people would buy? And first thing, it can't weigh 5 million tons. It's gotta come down and be more liftable. In other words, something you could actually put on your desk and lift yourself. Second of all, it had to be a whole lot more affordable. A whole lot more affordable. And then the other thing, in the Billings 404 computer, we had memory. You have to have memory to run a program. Well, that computer had 4K of memory with an optional 4K additional memory you could put in. And for some of you old gurus, it used the S100 bus, and there it was. Well, no one could buy it. 4K, 8K wasn't enough memory to brush your teeth. I mean, it's just, wow. Especially since you need a 6K of memory just to be able to display the stuff on the screen. And so I said, okay, we've got to figure out how to shrink this down to put everything all into one computer, and it needs to get a lot more powerful. Well, when Federico went over and started Zilog, because he wanted to have a lot more control on the process, and he made the next generation, which was the Z80. It was like light years more advanced. I mean, you just can't even hardly compare it. It had a lot more registers, it had a lot more instructions, and it did some really interesting things. It would address 64K of memory, the same as the other one, but he did something that I think was genius. He came up with an idea of making memory that was these little capacitors. We call it dynamic memory. Okay. And it was a memory where if the CPU would write data into this memory, it wouldn't stay. With static memory, you'd write it and it would stay till the power went off. Then it would go away. You had to have a boot memory to get it started, and then you had to get the program off of the floppy disk, because as soon as you turn off the power, the static memory would forget everything. So my 4K of memory in the Billings 404 was static. Static memory would hold the data till you turned off the power, but it was really expensive. That's why we only had 4K. That's what made the computer so darn expensive. That and the big heavy cabinet and everything. So his idea was this dynamic memory. The dynamic memory was like a little capacitor, and you put a voltage on there. If it was a 1, you'd leave no voltage if it was a 0. So you store 1, 0, 0. And as soon as you would charge that capacitor, it would start to discharge. And pretty soon it would forget that it was supposed to be a 1. But what you do is every a few milliseconds, that means thousandths of a second, you go around and you'd read every memory location. If it was a 0, you'd say, okay, you'd do nothing. If it was a 1 and it was starting to discharge, you say, oh, you want to be a 1, and you'd write a new voltage pulse to it to charge it back up. So you keep charging up. Well, and Federico put the memory refresh right inside of the Z80 CPU. So you could use dynamic memory, which was so much cheaper. And so in the Billings computer, we had a full 64K of RAM. Wow. Wow. And another thing that the Z80 allowed you to do was to do a thing he called memory map. So you could switch in pages of memory back and forth, so you could do a lot more things. So he came out with a CPU that was so much better that on my new computer, my all-in-one computer, we decided to use the Z80. We ordered it. This is the circuit board right here. Maybe we can get a top shot here so you can see it. The circuit board. Here's the Z80 microprocessor right here. All these other components are to hook it up to something. Over here is the little town of memory. This is the dynamic memory, 64K. So this was our computer. We had the Z80. We got it built. We started testing it, and it sort of worked, but not everything worked. And that's when I got to meet Federico, because we had the privilege of helping debug the Z80. I think we were, if not the first, one of the very first customers to use the Z80. Later on, everybody did. It became very, very popular. But it was a thrill to be able to work with a guy of his stature. Some of you probably have a cell phone or maybe a tablet and you swipe across. Well, later, he was the guy that figured out the capacitive touchscreen. Used to be we had resistive touchscreens, and if you wanted to say something by pushing the screen at it, the touchscreen, you just swipe, you know how it is. And so we have a lot of things to thank this guy for. He's one of the really, really great ones.
So Otto and I.
Otto and I?
Yes, Otto and I are wondering.
Who's Otto?
Otto is one of your students who just wrote in.
Oh, hi, Otto. Where's he from? Do you know?
You know what? He didn't say.
Well, anyway, hi, Otto.
So does that mean Mr. Billings helped make the very first PC?
Well, it's really interesting. What was the first microprocessor? And it was that little one they built for a calculator, but that wasn't really a personal computer. So then they made the bigger one. Eventually, at Intel, they made the 8080, which most people consider was the first real microprocessor.
Okay.
But it was actually the third one. It's just the first one that's big enough to read and run a program. A lot of people would say they were the one that made the first computer. At the computer conference that I went to in California, where we unveiled our computer, we were the only ones that had an all-in-one computer, we called it. And
So you're a real
the
pioneer.
terminology of a personal computer, a PC, wasn't invented for 5 more years when IBM came out with the IBM personal computer. So mine was 5 years before that. We didn't call it a personal computer, we called it a microcomputer, the Billings microsystems.